everybody. Nice to see everyone. We have quite a crowd. Thank you for being here. I know there's a lot going on at the conference, and we're really pleased that you took some time to be here for this conversation around skills-based hiring. Is it rhetoric or reality? So to start us off, what do you all think? What do you think about this skills-based trend and using it as a hiring tool? Who many thinks it's reality? Anybody? So, how about rhetoric? Team rhetoric, where are you? Over there? Okay. Do we have a team half and half? I think I'm in the middle somewhere. Okay. All right, well, we'll see. Well, our panel's going to help us figure this out. So my name is Maria Flynn. I'm the president and CEO of Jobs for the Future. It's great to be here, and I am joined by 4 experts on this topic who are going to get us all thinking in different ways. So Matt Siegelman is the president and CEO of Burning Glass Institute. Matt and I have partnered on things for probably about 15 years, and we had an announcement actually earlier today that our organization's just received a grant from the GitLab Foundation to really look deeper at the issue of quality and outcomes. And so a little teaser for you to learn more about that later. Then we have Linda Chai, who is a VP of Talent Development at LinkedIn. We have Jeff Schwartz, who is a VP of Insights and Impact at Gloat. And we have Christine Cruz Vergara, who is the Chief Education Strategy Officer at Handshake. So 4 folks are really coming at this topic from different points of view. And we're going to start the conversation off with Linda. And Linda, before I turn it to you, I'll just share one data point from some research that my organization did with our partners at American Student Assistance, which was that over 70% of employers actually think that skills are a better kind of predictor than degrees. Yet we know that far fewer of that percentage are actually using and employing skills-based hiring practices, particularly at scale. And so, Linda, at LinkedIn, you're seeing a lot of national trends in this area. And so wondering, what are you seeing? How does that vary by sector? And do you think that the trends are long-term, or is this just a fad?
Thank you, Maria. For too long, the way people get hired is because the places they have been, the people they know, and the degree they earned. So our data through LinkedIn on the platform really point to a new trend that's starting to be long-term. We see that employers are realizing when they focus on more underlying skills instead of past experience and degree, they can really deal with their biggest business challenge while unlock opportunity for millions that are qualified but could be overlooked candidates. So there's one statistics suggesting that the job posting on LinkedIn platform in the past 12 months or so has seen 21% increase explicitly calling out skills requirement. And in addition to that, we know the recruiters that are filling their roles are looking for skills match. So you know that sometimes LinkedIn recommend jobs and they will say, hey, you have 5 out of the 10 skills this job requires. So that's all the algorithm happening at the back end. And then in terms of degree requirement, 1 in 5 jobs on LinkedIn right now a dropping degree requirement, and that's up 15% from just a year ago. So all these are really, really interesting to say there is a trend being shifted from the past paradigm. And in terms of sectors, we are seeing this skill-first approach really taking effect for sectors that having labor shortages. So education is a good example. Think about teachers, but also growing roles in online learning and ed tech, right? If we focus on the skills a worker can bring to the table, we can increase the talent pool by 20x. So imagine we can have another summit at 20 times the size of GSV. And that's a good thing, right? And then other stats, I can't remember that many, but I'll just give you some. For supply chain and transportation, it can be more than 30 times. Oil and gas, 13.5 times. Retail, 38.9. Manufacturing, 31.4. So essentially, we see a lot of workers who have the skills but are overlooked by our outdated system could come into play. And these are just a sampling of the industries where we see the untapped potentials could be unleashed. Healthcare is another example. We see it's a place where degree requirements are dropping faster than any other sectors. 25% of the healthcare jobs right now don't require a degree. So yeah, I think the diversity, inclusion, and belonging impact is huge when we look for alternative routes to bring workers into the talent pool. We know that when companies focus on skills and hire for skills, there's an outsized impact on especially women. The talent pool of women in the US could increase 26% more than men if we are really focusing on skills. Opportunity at work, research has some good findings to suggest 70 million of workers have acquired skills through alternative routes like workforce training, military service, community college. So our data suggests that if they could join the talent pool, it's like 9% increase. So all these data basically is saying that this is something already happening, and companies who pay attention to this will have a competitive advantage to have expanded and diverse talent pool.
Great, thank you. And I know that Opportunity in Work was in here earlier, right before us, having a discussion about it. Was anyone here for that conversation? Okay, so you guys are getting like a double dose of skills-based hiring. So Matt, at BGI, you all are really working to kind of build the infrastructure that needs to be in place for this process to go to scale. And when you think about what employers need to do, so first it's kind of change at the policy level. So even at JFF, we kind of changed our policy to remove degrees from our postings, but then you need to put those policies into practice. And where do you think that employers need to start on this journey? So how do you get beyond policy change?
So I think you're so right, Maria, to call out. Am I supposed to press it? It's on? Okay, fabulous. Okay, so look, I think, Maria, you're so right to call out the disjoint today between policy and practice. So, and I think this is exactly at the nub of the question here of whether this is reality or rhetoric, and why it's actually both. Because on the one hand, and Linda just laid out the case why this is so important that we shed unnecessary degree requirements. At the same time, one of the things we've seen in our research is, yes, employers are taking degree requirements out of postings, but there really is a very significant disjoint between policy and practice. We were looking, for example, at tech employers, precisely because tech employers have been so vocal about why it's not relevant whether you have a degree. We don't care if you have a degree, we just care if you can code. It's an industry where there are good validation mechanisms. And yet what we've seen is that in some of those companies that have been the loudest, and I think speaking with sincerity, have nonetheless, you'll look at their software engineering jobs, 70, 80, sometimes 90+% of their postings still requiring a degree. And so why that disjoint in companies that really, I think, sincerely believe that there is a better way? And I think a lot of it comes down to hiring managers and what tools we give to hiring managers to be able to make more effective decisions. And I'd say there's a couple of things that help here from an infrastructure perspective. First of all, it's the advent of better analytics. Data drives so much of the way we make decisions in so much of what we do across so many different industries. And we've seen certainly, there's a lot of work tech represented here at GSV. We've seen more and more data driving these kinds of decisions. Jeff certainly will talk, I'm sure, a lot about the kind of capabilities that exist today to understand more specifically what are the requirements, what are the credentials that matter, and what are the ones that don't. Because otherwise you're left with impressions, and we're leaving things to managers to make decisions. So that's one of the things that I think is really important, and to have those kinds of feedback mechanisms. Often, I spent most of my career looking at a lot of job postings, and I often comment that it feels something like an archaeological dig. There's all these layers of sediment where people put various kinds of requirements in there, and they just kind of stick. And part of what we have to do is use analytics to peel those sedimentary requirements away. But some of it is also about culture and how we can help managers, hiring managers, as opposed to people in the C-suite who may get this, to get to a level of comfort that makes this work. I sometimes wonder whether we're asking too much of hiring managers by going straight for skills-based hiring. Notwithstanding the really important and articulate case that Linda just made about why this is so important and why we need to get to skills-based hiring as our end goal. If you go to a manager who's always hired based on degrees, and you say, okay, here's all the reasons why you shouldn't, check, I get it, then you're faced with those two candidates. And especially as we go into a job market now where there may not be the same kind of tightness as there's been, which are you actually going to go with? And so I wonder if one of the ways we should be starting this conversation is not around skills-based hiring, but skills-based promotion. Hiring is always a risk, right? And you can say, well, maybe it's riskier if I go with the degree, I don't go with the degree. But if you give me the choice of saying, hey, here's somebody inside the organization, we know she's fantastic. Would you take her, even though she doesn't have a degree? Or would you take a candidate who you know what he knows from Adam who does have a degree, which is a higher risk? Well, I'd take the person inside the organization any day. And I think if we start potentially moving the narrative there, we'll get managers experienced at being able to make those kinds of decisions more effectively. We can put the other sets of things in place, the ability to know where the talent is, to know what credentials people have, why I'm so excited about the partnership that we're launching around credential quality. But we need to get that culture, that muscle built first.
I think it's a great point about the kind of the incumbent workers, and that resonates with some work that JFF has done over the years around work-based learning, and particularly in the healthcare sector, looking at that internal career advancement based on the skills of the incumbents. I like that a lot. And so, Christine, I'm going to go to you next, because I think as this topic has kind of moved through the field, right, I think we've run the risk of having like skills versus degrees, right? Kind of this almost false dichotomy of an argument. And at Handshake, you are working with a lot of the traditional post-secondary institutions. And so how do you think about kind of how degrees and skills coexist? And how do you think about like helping students maneuver in a skills-first ecosystem?
Yeah, I think the reality is skills and degrees already coexist together. And if you really think about it, so Matt used the analogy of a dig, I'll use the analogy of clothing. But essentially degrees, majors, it's just clothing, right, around a set of skills. If you think of each article of clothing, your shirt, your pants, your socks, your shoes, your accessories, as individual sets of skills that when you put together gives you a look. Am I preppy? Am I punk rock? Am I trendy, right? becomes the clothing, the container around that set of skills. So a major is really just a container. It's your outfit choice for a set of skills. But that's not how higher education thinks about it. That's not how they talk about it. So therefore, that's not how the students talk about it. And that's not how they think about it when they talk to employers. And I think for a lot of employers, what we're seeing is it's a little bit of rhetoric. It's also a little bit of reality. I think employers genuinely want it to be more of a reality, but I don't know that they have all of the tools, quite frankly, as Matt was saying, to best articulate what are the most critical pieces of clothing that you actually need for this job. I don't need you to wear the full suit. I actually just need you to have the pants and the top and maybe a tie, and that's it. That's actually all I need from you. Right? But they haven't articulated that. So when they don't articulate that, the student then doesn't have a good sense of, okay, well, actually, I have all these different pieces of clothing, all these different skills. How do I put it together in a way that makes sense for this industry or for this type of role or for this type of role? And I think until we actually solve that common taxonomy and common language around that, I think we're going to keep asking this question. Is it reality or is it rhetoric? Because I think part of the issue is purely language in the way that we think about it. And I think, sometimes we'll have schools come to us and say, hey, we're gonna build this badge. And when we build this badge, our students are going to be found by employers and employers are gonna love it. And I'm like, yeah, okay, cool. You are one of thousands of institutions and you have a badge and you have a badge and you have a badge. And all these employers, they don't know because they're not looking at all these different badges, right? What you want to do is you want to break it down to its component parts, and the component part is the skill. So the sooner and the faster we can all speak in plain language and just articulate what the skill is or skills that we really need for a particular job or role, the faster we will be able to help both our partners in education to think about it from this standpoint, from this perspective, and the faster we'll be able to translate that to students so that they're actually able to then articulate their articles of clothing or their skills to the right employer and to make that fit and to also know, okay, when I'm going into this setting, I put it together in this way for this type of outfit. When I go into this setting, I put it together this way for this type of outfit. And I think that's really, really critical. So in my opinion, they already coexist. We just don't think about it that way because we're not using the language in that way.
That's awesome. I like the outfit analogy. That makes a lot of sense. And so Jeff, so Gloat is a fascinating company. I've really enjoyed learning about it. And you're really using AI and different tech tools to create a talent marketplace, like not only for traditional jobs, but gig work and kind of jobs that don't even exist yet. And so how are you going about that? And how do you think of skills as part of that equation?
So first, thank you, Maria, and thanks to the panel. I was going to joke, it is an expert panel, but we're all experts in something that is evolving in real time. So one of the lines, I wrote a book a couple years ago called Work Disrupted. If you've lived through the past couple of years, which we all have, we're all futurists because we've seen things happen that we just did not imagine would happen as quickly as they did. Gloat it's sort of hard to describe what we do. I was joking earlier that we focus on something we call workforce agility, which is both understanding the skills foundation, the skills in a company, in an organization. Most companies don't know what skills their employees have. They don't know what skills they need. They don't know what skills are sunsetting, and they don't know what skills are sunrising. I think that's a word, sunrising. And they're trying to figure that out. The way we look at it, and again, I'm going to look at it from inside an organization. I think it's obviously, I think it's an interesting perspective. But I'll answer it directly. I think that skills-based hiring, internally and externally, is the new reality, with the emphasis on new. Not necessarily the emphasis on reality, right? Why are we focusing at Gloat on skills-based talent markets inside organizations and skills-based careers? Because the job, in some sense, and I feel bad saying this, Maria, because your job's in your title of your organization, but jobs, as the archaeologists might say, jobs is a dated artifact, right? Jobs was a very useful way of thinking about how we hired, how we promoted, how people moved through organizations. jobs historically were pretty static, right? And they changed very, very slowly, right? And work was a collection of tasks that we could put into the canister of a job, and we could create, we used to, maybe we still do, we created labor supply chains. And we would go out to the market and we would find people that were developing for the jobs of the present. And then we would build employee life cycles around them, right? The job is being pulled in two directions. Jobs, and this is from Boudreaux and from Ravin Jazuthasen and Sue Cantrell at Deloitte. Jobs are being taskified, they're being fragmented. Some of that fragmented work is done by machines, some by people, but work is also being projectized. It's becoming more complex. And in this world, we need a new way of moving people around, right? And simply leaving them in their canisters isn't working. So by creating a skills-based talent marketplace where employees can find jobs available in their companies, internal projects or development opportunities, learning that are relevant to them and what the organization needs, and careers. We just literally launched last month a career program for Walmart Canada. And they started with a career marketplace. They did not start by creating a skills taxonomy. We could sort of debate where do you start in this. But I think one of the things I just want to briefly emphasize, and then I will take a breath, is yes, our platform is an AI-based platform, but this is not a technology question in this sense. Whether we're looking at skills-based hiring, bringing people into an organization, or skills-based movement and promotion inside an organization, this is uniquely a people and technology and culture and management practices question, Matt, exactly as you outlined. And it's not a mechanistic process. We're not sort of picking up like the claw, right, in the Toy Story movies. It's like, what skills do you have? And we're going to pick you up, and you have this set of skills. We're going to move you over to this job there. We're trying to identify and understand what skills you have, but also what interests you have, what aspirations you have, and also what skills and aspirations we need in our organization, right? So it's a very interesting, uniquely human and machine endeavor to say, what skills do you have? What do you want to develop? And when you get that 4 out of 10 or that 5 out of 10 rating, what employees want to know is, what can I do to develop more of those skills and experiences? Do I do a project? Do I take a course? Do I find a mentor in that part of the organization in order to grow? And that's what we're looking at. Skills-based talent markets, skills-based career marketplaces, putting the people in the organization in motion, right? Because we are in motion. I think that's the big shift, right? The old reality was static systems, labor supply chains built on, clearly historically relevant and validated credentials. That doesn't work. And my favorite example of this, and I'll end with this, Maria, is I'm waiting to find the job descriptions, and Matt, you'll probably have seen them already, for ChatGPT. I'm waiting for the first job description that says, we want somebody with 2 years of experience in ChatGPT. Right. And you could probably find somebody there. It's probably Sam Altman, by the way, right? The founder of OpenAI, because skills and technologies and work is evolving so quickly, we cannot use these mechanistic static approaches. So I'll hand it back to you.
Awesome, thanks. So many ways we could take this conversation. I think next, let's dive into equity a little bit, right? Because I think LinkedIn and Handshake, you both have research that really shows that if you bring skills into the equation, it opens up, kind of the universe of talent. But I think there's also, some worry that I would share, right? That we also run the risk of this kind of movement creating almost a new form of tracking, potentially, right? If we don't kind of think about skills-based hiring in a truly equitable way. So I'm just curious if folks have thoughts about what do we need to be doing kind of along this journey to make skills-based hiring a true kind of equity lever?
It's such a profound question. I love the fact that you went straight to it.
I'm like going off script too, so.
No, I love that, Maria. So this morning we had another session talking about the barriers and the challenges when companies, wanted to get on the skills train, but for some reason, we've been talking about it for years, we haven't made the progress for as far as we thought we could, right? And I think not wanting to go too fast, wanting to do it right, acknowledging the change management with managers, with leaders who are used to a way to identify, develop, and promote and hire is going to be critical. And I think all these are the right considerations. However, my personal point of view is nothing is going to be perfect, right? So we all know that in today's society, having a degree, for example, is not attainable or even accessible for many. So, having another standard might bring some new challenges and problems, but it shouldn't stop us because we know the older problems that we wanted to solve. So, for example, I think there are some really promising early signs for equity. Take women as an example. We launched the tool called Skill Match. I kind of alluded towards earlier. So this is a way to evaluate whether a job opportunity is good fit for you by comparing your profile with the job description. And we know, and there are a lot of evidence pointing towards that, women in particular or underrepresented group, once they see there's a high degree of skill match to a role, they are more likely to apply. And that's compared to if they are not encouraged with that data insight. So I think that helped them to actioning because at the end of the day, we need to show workers what's in it for them. If we go to skill-based, what they get out of this. They get better opportunities, they get hired, they get promoted, right? So I think that's really, really important for us to get people to feel they trust us with their skill data, and then they also want to be actively learning, developing, because at the end of the day, we are solving this issue for them.
I think to Linda's point, it's not perfect. And I think as human beings, we categorize to make sense of things, right? And so one of the things that we've done with degrees and with majors and with schools, quite frankly, is we use it as a proxy for quality, right? So we make assumptions that if you have a certain type of degree, if you have a certain type of major, if you went to a certain type of school, you're probably more qualified. You may have more skills in certain areas. And I think what we have to do as we go into this skills-based hiring conversation is just acknowledge that it is a natural inclination as human beings to want to do the same thing when we're talking about skills. And so if you just take hard skills, for example, and you think about all the different entities that actually provide skills-based learning, there is naturally going to be somewhat of a hierarchy that people already have in their head around, oh, well, you got that through Google versus you got that through AWS versus you got that through Salesforce versus you got that through something, right? The brand name of those organizations or companies that may be providing some of that learning, or if you look at the boot camps that are out there, there's already connotation that people have around that. And so I think the question becomes, as we build the right tools, as Matt was saying earlier, can we do it in a way that allows you to really just identify whether or not the person has the skill, regardless of where they got that skill from? They may have gotten that skill actually from their undergraduate institution that may or may not be prestigious. They may have gotten it from a boot camp. They may have literally just learned it on their own, but they're really effing good at it, right? And so it kind of doesn't matter where they got it, it's can they do it? Right? And then I think that actually goes to the second point, which is really around evaluation. And I don't think we've really cracked the nut on how do you properly evaluate whether or not somebody has the skill. I think it's a little bit easier to do it with the hard skills, quote unquote hard skills. I think when you actually look at a lot of the core skills, though, that we all know is still really critical for an entry-level hire or a senior level hire, a mid-level hire, that's really hard to assess for. How I assess for whether or not someone is a good writer is likely to look different than how Maria thinks about a good writer for JFF, because the context and the culture of our organizations are different. And so I think we still have a lot of work to do around figuring out the evaluation piece, and I think that piece will also help to either reinforce or potentially exacerbate your concern.
Yeah, I think Christine is spot on that there's no perfect way of evaluation, but at the same time, we also know we need a currency for skills. Jeff was describing before the importance of having a skill marketplace, and whether that's within a specific platform or whether we're actually thinking about the broader ecosystem we all live in, it depends on having a currency for skills. And right now, it's not that there is no currency, but there's so much noise that it's very hard to hear the signal. The US Chamber's Credential Engine project has done phenomenal work to catalog 1.2 million credentials. There are 114,000 words in the Oxford English Dictionary. 1.2 million, so 10 times as many credentials as there are words in the English language. The question then is, can we develop a relatively straightforward set of metrics that, while not perfect, to Christine's point, how I evaluate a skill may be different from how somebody else evaluates a skill, but can we agree which sets of credentials seem to actually give people mobility in their careers? Which sets of people get people from A to B? We can evaluate that within the context of a given company. We can evaluate that writ large. But I think when we have that set of outcomes that we can associate with credentials, and we can associate credentials with skills, it's a really important bedrock to start from in building a skills currency and in affecting the kind of skills marketplace Jeff was describing.
So, Jeff, a question for you. So especially here at this conference, we see lots of startups and tech platforms, and so employers, right, are being pitched lots of different possible tools that they could use to bring skills-based hiring to life. Do you have thoughts on like how should employers be evaluating like what tools are best for them?
Well, yes, I have some thoughts on it. And the, I mean, afterwards, if people have some questions about the equity question, there's some very interesting positive effects that we're seeing around talent marketplaces and equity, but we'll move on from that. So when I mentioned a few minutes ago that skills-based hiring, skills-based talent development, skills-based promotion, skills-based mobility is a new reality with the emphasis on new, one of the challenges for looking at skills-based talent management and skills-based hiring and promotion is there really is no one in most organizations looking at work and skills together. There may be some people in the people analytics function that are doing that, but you know, it's sort of nice when you're selling a recruiting tool. When you're selling a recruiting tool, you go to the recruiter. When you're selling a learning tool, you go to the learning team. When you're selling a compensation tool, you go to the compensation team. When you're selling a skills-based strategy and skills-based ways of looking at both talent marketplaces, mobility, and careers, who do you actually go to? So I think this is a very interesting problem that we have right now, because in the last couple of years, we've introduced a new way of thinking. We are reframing beyond the job, as I mentioned before. And sort of the two entry points seem to be people in HR and talent who are focused on innovation. And often there is somebody in the HR and talent organization whose job is innovation. If I look at sort of the early customers of Gloat, Unilever, Schneider Electric, MasterCard, it was literally their talent innovation leaders who came in. Why? Because they had a cross-functional view. Similarly, it's the business unit leaders, the head of IT, when she says, look, I know that I do a lot of project-based work. I know that I cannot recruit my way I cannot recruit my way through the demand that I have for the people and the teams that I need in the technology organization, so I need another way of doing this. So the idea of a skills-based talent marketplace where skills-based career is really appealing to them. That's part of the challenge now. We're between worlds, right? We're not in the old world of sort of static, traditional jobs defined by degrees and historical legacy credentials, and we're not yet in, although we're going there, into this new world. And I think that's part of the challenge. I think if you're in an organization, I would encourage you to find the other disciplines, if you're in HR, across the entire talent suite. Not just learning, but recruiting and promotion and talent development, but also to be working with your business and functional leaders, because this is their problem. They're trying to find the workforces within the organization and outside that can do their work, right? And what we haven't spoken about very much today is the tremendous desire of employees and workers and future workers for agency. People want choice, and I'll leave you with this metaphor. So I mentioned before the claw, right? The metaphor for the claw. The other is when we think about skills-based programs, we think of the idea of a needle in a haystack, right? And a needle in a haystack is a really great metaphor, except for when you're talking about people. Because people are not a mechanistic thing, right? People have aspirations. People can constantly grow. So the metaphor I use, and often people groan when I use this metaphor, is what we're looking for in the organization are needles that want to be safety pins, right? We're looking for that aspiration. We're looking for that adjacency. We're looking for what can we do with our employees to help them acquire the skills and experiences to do what it is that we need them to do.
And so let's like flip the lens then from the employer side to the learner or the worker side. And so if we think about, solutions that are really centered around the individual, what recommendation do you have for how do we build the systems that help the worker succeed in a skills-based approach? So maybe, Christy, start with you from a handshake perspective. Are there ways to help students who are currently going through universities to think about how do they put their skills first, so to speak?
Well, I'll leave you with a spicy comment. It's not portfolios. So I think, and I say that a bit in jest, but the point being here is I think a lot of institutions sometimes think that the portfolio mechanism is the best way for students to actually learn and start to think about their skills and then to advertise that to employers. And I can tell you that we work with hundreds of thousands of employers, and the majority, if they are outside of the industry where they typically look at a portfolio, will not take time to actually look at a candidate's portfolio. Now, is that helpful for the student to learn? Is it helpful for them to reflect? 100%. But if you're doing it with the sole purpose of it actually getting viewed in visibility by an employer, I don't know if it's necessarily the most valuable. So if you are a portfolio company here, I would encourage you to think about what the value proposition is to the student and to the higher education institution. On the flip side, if you're a higher ed institution, I think a lot of this really comes down to articulation, right? So I have a 10-year-old son. And when we're doing different activities or he's doing different things, even just around the house, for example, he's not often thinking about what is the skill that he's gaining. He's thinking about what is the thing that I'm doing, right? So I've learned how to bake a cake. I learned how to make pasta, right? I learned how to help my friend build this thing out of cardboard, right? Okay, so he's thinking about the thing he did, not the skills he learned. And so it's as simple as often asking the question, hey, you did a really good job helping the neighbor build this cool cardboard thing that you ended up selling to the other neighbor. What skills did you think you actually learned out of that? Or you built this cake. What skill was involved in having to do that, right? Just taking a moment to ask the question really helps a lot of students to make a connection. I used to work in higher education before working at Handshake, and I think a lot of what I saw out of the thousands of students that I used to advise is that there's simply a disconnect between what they're doing and how they articulate it. It's not that they don't have the ability to do that. They do. They just need someone to ask them the question to help make that direct connection. So one of the things that I actually used to do at George Mason with the College of Arts and Sciences actually was to work with the faculty and the deans there to look at their pedagogy. the choices, the very intentional choices that educators, faculty were choosing to use in their classroom. We are going to do this group project. We are going to have a verbal presentation. We are going to have a team grade rather than an individual grade, right? These are all pedagogical choices. And they chose that for a particular reason. But how often do faculty ever articulate that reason to their classroom? It doesn't take more than 20 seconds to do it, okay? We have this project. We're going to do it as a team. The reason we're doing it as a team is because there's pretty much not any job you're ever going to take where you aren't required to have to do something as a team. And I know not everyone's going to pull their weight. Guess what? That's also like real life. And you're going to have to figure out how to work around that, right? You're going to have to figure out how to either motivate that team member or how to work around that so that you can still get the job done. That didn't take me more than 30 seconds to tell you. And by articulating that over and over and over again in every course and every year for students, they start to make that connection. And I know that feels very not technology savvy because it's not. It's just really tactical things that we can all leave this room and immediately go do.
Awesome. So I know we're almost at time, so we're going to finish with a kind of a lightning round and go down the row here, starting with Matt, with the question of, so say in 3 years, we want to move kind of the answer of this question more firmly to the reality category, right? So in 3 years, we want skills-based hiring to really be a reality. What is your top priority of what needs to happen to make that true?
So I think it's, I'm going to go with just two, right? Skills-based currency. How do we make sure we have a language, to Christine's point, that everyone can speak and that has real validation and quality outcomes behind it? And number two, I think it's about creating a culture of skills-based promotion, which leads to skills-based hiring.
Great. Linda.
I think similar to what you are saying, Matt, is making sure that the expectation on skills is clear to workers from day one when they started onboarding. And then every time in every conversation, in performance conversation, in career planning conversation, this is repeatedly reviewed, revisited, and planned on around the skills. I think managers play a big role. Again, we are asking managers to do like 100 things, but then I do think they have a very critical co-pilot role in this, and it has to be very clearly articulated to them, like their role in this.
Great.
I think this is both a mega shift and a meta shift. It's like a big shift, but how we do it and what it's about is a very significant shift. One of the things that we talk about at Gloat is that to change the game, you need to make game-changing moves. I think it's going to be very difficult to become a skills-based organization, both inside and outside, if you're trying to tweak the technologies and the processes that you already have, which historically have not been based on either skills or aspirations or mobility. So if we want something different to happen, we need to be doing some different things, which is why the next 3 years will be so interesting.
I know we're over, so I'm actually going to just plus everything Matt said because I think we got to see that happen.
Well, please join me in thanking our panelists for this conversation.